How's it going? My name is Sam New, and this is my video for the 40s and Today assignment on propaganda. I recently read the article and watched the videos on specifically the Nazi propaganda and the Triumph of the Will film in 1935, and I want to take the opportunity for the assignment to look at some more modern parts of propaganda and how they relate to propaganda during World War One and World War Two, specifically in like the mid 1930s. When I was watching the video, especially, a movie kept coming back to me when it comes to whenever I think of modern propaganda, I think of the movie Gods and Generals. Although it's a little bit out of like the time range, it started picking up a lot of like popularity and traction in the recent 2020s. So I thought it was very important to cover. This kind of hits home a little bit as a child that was raised a lot on a lot of kind of like Southern propaganda, you could say, kind of how I was taught in school, especially growing up in like Southern Utah, and like with everything that goes with that. And so a movie like Gods and Generals kind of like hit home to me. Unlike kind of the more like obvious forms of propaganda that we see in like Triumph of the Will, and these like very like radical like nationalistic ones. I think movies these days are a lot more subtle about it, especially when we're not during wartime. Gods and Generals was obviously made like way after, and is a movie about the Civil War, specifically highlighting a lot of like the South and the Southern ideas for the war. Gods and Generals really like pushes the idea of fighting for like liberty and freedom through states' rights, kind of being very wish-washy on the reason and the kind of motivations behind the Civil War, and is often referred to by historians and people who watch it very biased and like propaganda like to this Southern idea of life. We actually see that a lot when comparing it to the 1935 film Triumph of the Will. There's specifically a moment in that where like it kind of leads back to like in Germany, kind of German roots, and kind of glorifying that and using those like traditions to kind of further propagate what's going on in the video. And Gods and Generals kind of does the same thing. It very much highlights kind of the Southern life a little bit, especially like in the more like aristocratic type of life, like living in the South. Kind of glorifies it a little bit, kind of preaching back to the days of old. Everybody like the way they talk, the way they dress. It seems like everybody's so happy, including those in slavery, which we'll get to, and kind of like uses that glorification of like the olden times to kind of push its kind of political agenda, which in this case is like restating the reasons for the Civil War. There's quite a bit of stuff that's come out from Gods and Generals, like people talking about it in recent times. There was a video on YouTube by On-Site Films, who makes a lot of work on different kind of Civil War historical content. And he kind of highlights a lot of things, but the one thing I wanted to really focus on that kind of caught my eye is the portrayal of slaves in the film. As you know, in 1930s films, as talked about in the video, there's a lot of like portrayals or characterizations of different like races or like groups or ethnic groups, kind of either dehumanizing or like kind of removing them from their like regular existence almost. And in Gods and Generals, that happens not as directly as like the old KKK movie, but more in a way of portraying slaves as grateful or like happy in their position. Obviously, there could have been times in the Civil War where like instances like that happened, but Gods and Generals portrays it only on the side of, hey, all these slaves like liked their lives, they liked their masters, and enjoyed like what they were doing in this position, right? Or at the very least weren't violent or like inherently like wanting to not be in that position, right? And that is portrayed throughout the entire movie. There is no like hardline points where like slaves, it shows like the true like picture of slavery, that it's like washed in a way that seems glorified, much like the lives of the Southerners at the time. And that helps further like remove or like push the idea of, oh, this wasn't about slaves, or like, oh, slaves didn't even want freedom in the first place. And it kind of better encapsulates the idea that the war wasn't about slavery. There's an article on toolfi.ai, kind of going like really deep into this idea of like Gods and Generals being more like a modern version of like, they call it like neo Confederate propaganda, in the sense of like more glorifying it, the biases and all that. The one of the sections on it is called the Biases and Agenda of Gods and Generals, and it kind of highlights the portrayal of the Confederacy as like noble and virtuous, fighting for states' rights, and it does this through like long-winded speeches, kind of like highlighting generals or like key people in the Confederacy that a lot of people look back on as like great or like noble. And it states that it whitewashes the reality of American slavery, and like I was talking about before, like sanitizes and makes an inaccurate portrayal of slaves and their relationships with their masters. It shows it in a very positive light, in a very like positive coexistence, rather than the realities of owning another human being, which was terrible. Gods and Generals ignores that purposefully to kind of push that agenda, and a lot of people these days still watch it and quote it as a movie that they like for their portrayal of the South, which means that it got its job done for its purposes of really like getting rid of and creating a positive light despite the horrific things that happened throughout the Southern Confederacy. Much like in the 1935 film about Hitler and the Nazis, it is used to kind of cover up or portray those characters in a positive light. So that's my analysis on it. Obviously, with more and more movies coming out, more and more media, propaganda will forever and always, as long as we have ways of communicating on a mass level, there will always be some sort of propaganda. So even in the modern days, throughout, whether it's a modern topic or an ancient topic, it will always be a thing, and it's always good to keep a critical eye and to focus on facts and just listen for different ways that your feelings could be influenced by films like these, whether it's dehumanizing a group, whether it's kind of making things that are less positive, focusing them in a more positive light through things we like tradition or inspirational speeches. So that's my take. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good one.